Welcome to the Attic Mana Dad here. It's the channel where we explore what's fun in Magic, mostly on Arena, but today also in paper, also on MTGO. It's a preview of Aetherdrift. I'm breaking down everything for limited in a bunch of different videos, and I'm just recording my recording live so that I can also get it up as individual bits and pieces before I post the big omnibus video. And this one is about mana bases, but you can hang around and hear more about that. I will start recording in 5, 4, 3. Okay, let's talk about mana bases, aka are we going to be casting our Gear Hulks on curve? That's right, Aetherdrift has a cycle of 5 mythic level Gear Hulks that have CCDD type mana, 2 different double pips of mana in the mana base. I've been curious about this. I found a Reddit thread where people are going into all the math of this, and I feel like this comment actually breaks it down the best. But we'll talk more about what mana is available. Just so you know, they're talking about there are gain lands, so they're common, comes into play, tap, provides 2 mana, gains you 1 life, those kind of lands available in this set. So if you want to be able to cast your Gear Hulk, Dino, using the Salubrious Snail mana base tool, by the way, if you want to look it up and do it yourself, trying to wonder, okay, can you, how far off curve would you be if you don't play any double source producing lands? And then there are also Verges in this set too. We'll show those in a minute. But gain lands, you've got double sources. We're only talking about your double sources. I'm gonna talk about in this video, in this portion of the video, depending on what you're watching, other ways to fix your mana in this set. But just assuming gain lands only, because you're building a mana base, you drafted, let's say, 2 gain lands, you've got your Bright Glass Gear Hulk. What is the chance you're going to cast it off curve? Probably going to cast it on turn 5 with 2 gain lands, 1.080 turns off curve. If it was a 5 mana Gear Hulk, also about 1. Once you get up to a 6 mana Gear Hulk, you're probably going to be 1.5 turns off curve. So the sweet spot really is having 3 gain lands. If you know you've taken that Gear Hulk, pick one, pack one, snack those gain lands as much as you can, because then you're going to have a much better chance of casting it on curve. And of course, if your opponent drafted it, they're going to be playing a deck with no fixing, and they're going to cast it on curve against you every time, because that is how the laws of Magic work. So anyways, you can freeze the video if you need to, take a look at this, study this, but the idea is basically your typical 17 land 9/8, and I know that most people think Modern Limited is actually really a 16 land format, but let's just say you've got a Gear Hulk, you're going because you've got the Gear Hulk, you're going with the traditional 17 lands. You do a 9/8 split, and you put as many gain lands as you can get, as many double mana producing sources as you can get. I don't think you're going to be that far off curve from casting them, and they are pretty powerful, so it's probably worth it if you can do it, but I would warp my mana base and my deck construction around it if I got a Gear Hulk either in my sealed pool or in my draft and I wanted to play it. So Gear Hulks in the set, that's my spiel about it. Keep that in the back of your mind as we talk about what the mana bases are in this set. Okay, so let's take a look. Here's the lands. As I mentioned, we've got Verge lands, and these are the enemy colors, so I guess these are not going to help you cast your Gear Hulks. There's the 5 of them that we've been missing: black, white, green, black, white, red. It's actually, you could have multiples, right? Because you could have the opposite. You could have it adds blue, and then you only get red if you have an island or a mountain. So there are possibly more Verge lands that they could print. But anyways, these are the 5 that are in the set. Then you also have lands that enter tapped unless you control a mount or a vehicle. And mounts and vehicles, as we'll see in the archetypes section, those are concentrated in the Naya colors. So white, red, and green. Of course, all the colors have them, but the white, red, and green ones of these are probably going to be more valuable, and these lands can turn into a pilot. So this is just a little bit of help in case you drafted way too many vehicles more than mounts, because mounts are still creatures and you can still do stuff with them even if they're not saddled. But if you do that, and you can make pilot tokens if you flood out. So that is those lands. So keep those in mind, single source lands. Then, of course, all the gain lands, as we mentioned, they have custom art for the set. Pretty standard for a draft environment to have your basic, not your basic lands, but your common land slot filled with this type of land. Those are going to be key for casting Gear Hulks. And then there's some other stuff we'll talk about in the archetypes. There's a couple other mythics that have 3 colors. We also have colorless lands here. There's kind of a cycle based on rarity here. There's the rare one, Muruganda Raceway. They all have start your engines, which is the speed mechanic. So they all tap to add colorless. Muruganda Raceway, once you get up to max speed, speed 4, you tap to add colorless. So it turns into a soul ring or ancient tomb without the damage, however you want to say it. So that's interesting. Amonkhet Raceway taps to give a creature haste until end of turn. I do believe there are some monocolor decks. So if you do end up getting into a monocolor deck in this format, these lands will be something to take a look at. There's a pretty big drawback to the colorless lands if you're trying to play Gear Hulks, so maybe don't run them if you're running Gear Hulks. In between, that's going to be more of a discussion, I think. The common version of this, max speed, 3-tap, discard a card, draw a card. There is, in blue and red, there are some bonuses for drawing and discarding. So that's something to keep in mind, especially for those decks. Again, I don't know. We'll just have to see how the format plays out, whether the speed lands are going to be that great. If you are a deck that wants to get to max speed as fast as possible, having start your engines on a land, so just being able to hit it with the land drop right away is pretty good. So that's another consideration to keep in mind with, especially, I guess, Avishkar Raceway and Amonkhet Raceway. Amonkhet Raceway maybe more so because of the haste, and if you're probably playing a fast deck. Avishkar Raceway maybe more if you're in a faster version of the blue-red deck. Be interesting. So, okay. But if you do go the Gear Hulk route or the greedy 5-color greed pile route, which we'll talk about in the archetype section, you have a number of ways to do fixing. At common, you have starting column, which is just a 3-mana mana rock. It also has start your engines. When you get to max speed, you can sacrifice it to cash it in for card. Night Market is a cycling land that can just be any color, so that's pretty useful if your deck is a little bit greedy on color. Marshall's Path Cruiser is a vehicle that comes in, searches for a basic land, and the land goes to your hand, but doesn't ramp, and then it has a 5-color thing. So if you're doing the 5-color thing, you maybe want the Marshall's Path Cruiser, but maybe not, because in a format these days, especially one that I'm predicting is going to be really fast like this one, 3 mana just fetches you a land. Is that really that good? Probably not. And crew 5 is a lot to have to crew. Lumbering World Wagon, on the other hand, at rare, it does cost green, but this is only crew 4, and whenever this vehicle enters or attacks, you can search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield, tapped, and shuffle. So actually ramps you. Definitely something to consider if you're in a deck that wants to ramp and wants the fixing. You can also get a 3-mana rock vehicle with Velo Heart Bike, and that's only 2 to crew, but it is a 4/2, which is kind of a bit iffy in terms of stat line, but maybe you can trade it up. I don't know. There's this enchantment, Point the Way, also 1 mana to start your engines, so that's something to consider. Green doesn't have a ton of start your engines. The thing is, 4, sacrifice this enchantment, search your library for up to X basic land cards, where X is your speed. Put those cards onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. You probably want to get at least 3 lands with that. You've invested 5 mana at this point, and then that means that you've been attacking and you're already doing okay. So I don't know about Point the Way. It looks bad to me, but maybe there'll be a couple decks that can make good use of it. But yeah, I'm not excited about Point the Way. But it is there. If you're really desperate, you can go and spend 5 mana to ramp yourself 1 and fix yourself. It's also a 1 mana dork. It's a little fiddly. It's Molt Tender. You're going to have to exile a card from your graveyard to get the mana of any color with it. Black-green especially has no problem putting cards in the graveyard. So if you are black-green splashing out to something, maybe Molt Tender goes up in value. It can tap to mill a card, so it can give itself its own fuel, but it is a bit slow that way. But something to keep in mind, and especially in the late game, should have no problem tapping it to give yourself mana. The final way to fix yourself in this format is there are a couple cards that make treasure. We have Gilded Goda, a 2/2 horse mount. When it attacks while saddled, create a treasure token, and it is only saddle 1. So it's going to take you 2 creatures and an open attack with your 2/2 to get a treasure token. I wouldn't necessarily count on that, but it exists. It's there. If you're just a red deck and you can play it as a bonus, I think that's fine. You can see over here, Rocketeer Boost Buggy is a 3/2 vehicle that is red and green, and when it attacks, it makes a treasure. And it does have an exhaust ability to make it a creature permanently as a 4/3. So that's probably better if you happen to have some green. Ticket Tortoise, also a common here, 3/1 defender. When it enters, if an opponent controls more lands than you, create a treasure token. And that's not too hard to do if you are on the draw. You just play the tortoise on your turn 3 and then drop your land, and you've got your little treasure bonus. So you can accelerate into the next turn with a bonus. So I like Ticket Tortoise actually a lot. There needs to be more catch-up mechanics printed into Magic. So just a 2 mana common, 3/1, it crews stuff. Ticket Tortoise is something to keep an eye on. I don't know how it's going to play, but if you need that treasure, it's definitely something that probably will go up in the pick order. We've also got at rare Gonti Night Minister, not like super a build aroundy, I don't think. Whenever a player casts a spell they don't own, that player creates a treasure token. And how are you going to cast spells you don't own? Well, whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller looks at the top card of that opponent's library, exiles it face down. They may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Mana of any type can be spent to cast a spell this way. And so then once you play the card, you're going to get the treasure, and then maybe you can play some stuff out of your own hand that the treasure is good for. It seems a bit fiddly to rely on a 4 mana with black 2, but it's treasure, it's in the set, so there you go. And then Monument to Endurance. This is actually pretty easy to activate because there's a lot of cycling in the set. So whenever you discard a card, and cycling counts as discarding, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. One of the options is to create a treasure token. Now this is a 3 mana, does nothing when it comes down thing. But if you're cycling and you don't need the treasure, you can draw the card. And if your opponent is low, you can make them lose 3 life. I think it's probably playable. It takes a little bit of a build around cost with Monument to Endurance. So that is the mana bases. Keep that in mind as we talk about archetypes. And that is the next video in the order of the larger video. So stick around.